I never used to be afraid of flying. I flew all the time for work. Short flights, red eyes, cross-country trips. It never bothered me. I actually liked it. Something about being disconnected from everything for a few hours felt peaceful. That changed on a flight from Denver to Boston in November of 2022. I still don't fully understand what happened that night, and honestly, I don't think I want to. The flight was delayed almost 3 hours because of weather moving across the Midwest. By the time boarding started, it was already close to midnight. Everyone at the gate looked exhausted and irritated. A few people were arguing with airline employees about missed connections. I was just ready to get home. The plane itself was smaller than usual. One of those older narrow-body aircraft with dim yellow lighting and seats that felt too cramped even for average-sized people. I had seat 14A by the window. The second I sat down, I noticed something strange. The guy beside me, middle seat, looked terrified. Not nervous, not anxious. Terrified. He was probably in his late 40s with greasy hair and a wrinkled gray hoodie. He kept rubbing his hands together and staring toward the back of the plane like he was expecting someone to walk up behind him. When I sat down, he glanced at me and forced a smile. "You ever get a bad feeling on flights?" he asked. It caught me off guard. I laughed awkwardly. "Sometimes during turbulence." He didn't laugh back. "No," he said quietly. "I mean a really bad feeling." Before I could answer, a woman squeezed past us into the aisle seat. She looked annoyed already, headphones around her neck, muttering about delays. The man beside me immediately went silent. A few minutes later, boarding finished. The safety demonstration started. I remember noticing how empty the back rows were. Maybe 15 or 20 seats completely open. The weird guy kept staring back there. As we took off, the turbulence was rough enough to make a few people gasp. The plane rattled hard, climbing through clouds, but eventually things smoothed out. That's when the man beside me leaned toward me again. "There's someone on this plane who shouldn't be here," he whispered. I thought maybe he was drunk. I gave him a polite smile and said, "Okay." "I'm serious," he said. "I saw him in the terminal. He followed me here." The woman in the aisle seat rolled her eyes dramatically. "Can you not do this?" she snapped. "It's midnight." The guy shrank back into his seat after that. For the next hour, everything seemed normal. Cabin lights dimmed. Most people slept. Flight attendants rolled drink carts through quietly. I watched a movie with one earbud in and tried ignoring the guy beside me. Then I noticed something weird. The seatbelt sign turned on. Not unusual by itself, but there was no turbulence, no announcement either. A few passengers looked around confused. About 30 seconds later, one of the flight attendants walked quickly down the aisle toward the cockpit. She wasn't smiling anymore. Another flight attendant followed behind her. That uneasy feeling started creeping into my stomach. The weird guy beside me noticed too. "That's him," he whispered immediately. "Who?" "He moved." I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" "He was sitting in the back." The woman beside us sighed loudly and put her headphones on. A minute later, the captain came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor issue in the rear lavatory. Please remain seated while our crew handles the situation." His voice sounded calm, but fake calm, like he was forcing it. People exchanged looks, but nobody panicked. Then the screaming started. It came from the back of the plane. A woman screamed so loudly, it cut through the entire cabin instantly. Everyone jolted upright. A second later, another scream joined hers. Passengers started turning around in their seats. One of the flight attendants suddenly yelled, "Sir, you need to sit down." A man was standing near the rear bathroom. At first, I couldn't see him clearly because the cabin lights were dimmed. But something about him looked wrong. He was incredibly tall, thin to the point of looking sick. His head almost touched the overhead bins, and he wasn't moving, just standing completely still in the aisle. A flight attendant approached him cautiously. "Sir, I need you to return to your seat immediately." No response. The plane suddenly hit turbulence, hard. People shouted as the aircraft dropped sharply for a second. Oxygen masks almost deployed. Luggage shifted overhead with loud thuds. When the plane steadied again, the man was gone. I remember hearing nervous laughter from somewhere near the front, like people were trying to convince themselves everything was fine. Then a man across the aisle said, "Where the hell did he go?" The rear bathroom door was open now, empty. The flight attendants looked genuinely shaken. One of them picked up an intercom phone near the galley with trembling hands. The weird passenger beside me looked pale. "That's him," he whispered again. I was starting to feel scared now too. Not because of ghost stories or supernatural stuff, because everyone on the plane suddenly seemed afraid at the same time. That's contagious. About 10 minutes later, 2 flight attendants began quietly walking row to row, checking passenger seat numbers against a printed manifest. They stopped at our row. "Sir," the older attendant asked the nervous man beside me, "can I see your boarding pass?" He handed it over immediately. She checked it, nodded, then moved on. I asked, "What's going on?" She forced a smile. "Just verifying seating assignments." But her face said otherwise. A few rows behind us, I heard someone say, "There's an extra passenger?" The cabin got noticeably louder after that. Whispers everywhere. People sitting up, looking around. The nervous man leaned close to me again. "He's not on the manifest." "What?" "The tall man." I stared at him. "How would you know that?" "Because I counted." I almost laughed at how insane that sounded. But before I could respond, the woman beside us suddenly grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. "Look," she whispered. At the front of the plane, near first class, the tall man was standing there now, perfectly still, just staring down the aisle. I finally saw his face clearly. I wish I hadn't. His skin looked gray, not pale, gray. His eyes looked too dark, almost completely black in the dim cabin lighting. And there was something wrong with his smile. It stretched way too wide. A little kid near the front started crying immediately. One of the flight attendants froze in place, staring at him. The captain suddenly came over the intercom again, voice tense this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we need everyone seated immediately." The tall man tilted his head slowly toward the speaker. Then every overhead light in the cabin shut off at once. People screamed. For maybe 5 seconds, the plane was completely dark except for the dim floor lighting along the aisle. And in that darkness, I could still see him standing there, motionless, smiling. Then the lights came back. He was gone. Complete chaos erupted after that. Passengers were yelling over each other. Flight attendants rushed through the aisles trying to calm people down. A woman near the back was hyperventilating. The nervous passenger beside me looked like he was about to cry. "He followed me," he kept muttering. "I knew he would." I finally snapped. "Who is he?" The guy looked at me with bloodshot eyes. "I saw him 3 months ago." He swallowed hard before continuing. "On another flight. I didn't say anything. That plane crashed." Every hair on my arm stood up. He explained that he'd been flying from Chicago to Seattle earlier that year. During the flight, passengers reported seeing a tall man walking the aisle, even though nobody recognized him. According to him, the crew couldn't identify the passenger either. The plane experienced severe electrical problems before making an emergency landing. 2 days later, that same aircraft crashed during another flight. "There were no survivors," he whispered. The woman beside us slowly removed her headphones. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then the plane lurched violently. Way worse than before. The entire aircraft shook hard enough for people to scream. Oxygen masks finally dropped from the ceiling. Drinks and phones flew off tray tables. The captain's voice came over the speakers, panicked now. "Brace positions! Brace positions!" People were crying everywhere. The plane dropped suddenly again, like falling down an elevator shaft. I genuinely thought we were going down. And in the middle of all that chaos, I saw him, standing near the cockpit, smiling directly at me, not at anyone else, at me. The lights flickered around him violently. Then he lifted one hand slowly and pointed toward the emergency exit beside our row. The plane shook again. A loud metallic bang echoed somewhere below us. People were praying out loud now. The nervous man beside me grabbed my arm so hard his nails dug into my skin. "He wants someone," he whispered. Then every screen in the cabin turned on at once, even the ones that had been off. Static filled them. And for one split second, all the screens showed the exact same thing: a burning airplane wreck. Then everything shut off. Dead silence. The turbulence stopped instantly. Just stopped. The aircraft leveled out smoothly. No shaking, no alarms, nothing. A few seconds later, the captain came back over the intercom, sounding confused and out of breath. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appear to have regained control." Nobody clapped. Nobody spoke. The rest of the flight was dead silent. No sign of the tall man again. When we landed in Boston around 5 a.m., police and emergency vehicles surrounded the plane. They kept everyone seated while officers boarded. Passengers immediately started talking over each other, trying to explain what they saw. But here's the part that still bothers me most. According to airline records, there were exactly 63 passengers on board that night. Exactly the number listed on the manifest before takeoff. No extra passenger, no missing passenger, nothing. The nervous man beside me, gone. His seat was empty by the time we reached the gate. And the airline later told me seat 14B had never been assigned to anyone on that flight. I haven't flown since. I'm from Cebu, and until this happened, I used to think airplane horror stories were exaggerated nonsense people made up online for attention. After what happened to me in 2021, I don't make fun of those stories anymore. I still fly sometimes because my job requires it, but I never take late-night flights now, and I absolutely refuse to sleep on planes, especially if the cabin lights go out unexpectedly. Back then, I was working as a junior engineer for a telecommunications company. My boss sent me to Manila for a 3-day training seminar. Nothing unusual. I'd flown between Cebu and Manila plenty of times before. The problem started on the trip home. My original afternoon flight got canceled because of heavy rain near Manila. By the time the airline rebooked passengers, the only available flight left for Cebu was just after midnight. Everyone at the terminal looked miserable. Parents trying to calm crying kids. Business travelers sleeping against their bags. Employees at the gate getting yelled at nonstop. I just wanted to get home. The plane itself looked older than most domestic aircraft I'd flown on. The cabin lighting had that faded yellow tint that made everything feel dirty. Even before takeoff, the air conditioning kept cutting in and out. I had seat 22F by the window. The man beside me in 22E was around my age, maybe mid-20s, wearing a black hoodie despite the heat. He kept glancing toward the back of the plane nervously. At first, I thought maybe he was scared of flying. Then he asked me something weird before we even left the gate. "Did you notice someone staring at us while boarding?" I looked at him, confused. "No." He swallowed hard and looked away. "Never mind." A few minutes later, a flight attendant gave the safety demonstration while people barely paid attention. Once we finally took off, most passengers relaxed immediately. The storm outside still made the plane shake lightly every few minutes, but nothing extreme. About half an hour into the flight, the cabin lights dimmed. A lot of passengers started sleeping. I was watching downloaded videos on my phone when I noticed the guy beside me sitting stiffly upright, staring toward the rear galley. "You okay?" I asked quietly. He nodded too quickly. "Yeah." But he clearly wasn't okay. I followed his line of sight toward the back of the cabin. That's when I noticed the woman. She was standing near the rear lavatory, completely motionless. At first, nothing about her seemed unusual. Long black hair, gray cardigan, head slightly lowered. But after almost a full minute, I realized something strange. She hadn't moved at all, not even slightly. No shifting weight, no looking around. Just standing there, perfectly still. One of the flight attendants eventually approached her. I couldn't hear the conversation, but the attendant looked confused. The woman slowly pointed toward the bathroom door without lifting her head. The attendant nodded and walked away. The woman still didn't move. The guy beside me whispered suddenly. She was sitting beside me at the gate. I looked at him. So, she kept staring at me. I shrugged. Maybe coincidence. But honestly, something about her was starting to bother me too. 5 minutes later, the seatbelt sign turned on. The captain announced turbulence ahead due to weather near the Visayas region. The plane started shaking harder this time, enough for overhead bins to rattle. Some passengers gasped nervously. The woman at the back still hadn't moved. The guy beside me looked pale now. Then the turbulence stopped suddenly. Complete calm. And right after that, every light in the cabin flickered once, twice, then went out completely. People immediately started murmuring. The emergency floor lights activated along the aisle, casting this dim bluish glow through the cabin. A child somewhere near the front started crying. After maybe 10 seconds, the lights came back. But the woman near the bathroom was gone. I figured she finally entered the lavatory. Then the flight attendant near the rear galley suddenly rushed forward quickly, looking shaken. She stopped another attendant and whispered something urgently. Both of them looked back toward the bathroom. A weird tension spread through the cabin after that. Passengers noticed it too. Even when flight attendants try acting normal, you can tell when something's wrong. The guy beside me leaned closer. She disappeared. I frowned. What? She was gone before the lights came back. I started getting irritated. You couldn't see anything. I know what I saw. Before I could answer, someone near the back shouted. Not a scream. More like startled yelling. Several passengers turned around immediately. A man stood up halfway from his seat asking, "Who's that?" I looked toward the rear cabin and saw the woman again. Except now she was standing in the aisle halfway down the plane, closer to us, still motionless, still staring downward so her hair covered most of her face. The nearest flight attendant approached carefully. "Ma'am, you need to return to your seat." No response. The attendant repeated herself louder this time. Slowly, the woman lifted her head. Even from several rows away, I felt my stomach drop. Her face looked wrong somehow. Her skin looked unnaturally pale, almost gray under the dim cabin lights. Her eyes seemed too dark, and she was smiling. Not a normal smile, way too wide. The attendant actually stepped backward. Then the woman suddenly turned toward the window beside her and slammed her forehead against it. Hard. Several passengers screamed. The sound echoed horribly through the cabin. Before anyone could react, she did it again. Bang, again, bang. The flight attendants rushed toward her immediately while people panicked around them. The guy beside me grabbed my arm. "Don't look at her," he whispered. But I couldn't stop, because after the third impact, there was no blood. Nothing. Not even a mark on the glass. The woman stopped moving completely. Then she slowly turned toward us again, still smiling. One of the flight attendants grabbed her shoulder carefully. The second her hand touched the woman, every overhead screen on the plane turned on at once. Static filled every monitor. Passengers shouted in confusion. Then the screens changed. Instead of flight maps or ads, they showed security camera footage. A grainy video of an airplane cabin, dark, almost empty. At first, people just stared confused. Then someone near the front whispered, "That's this plane." They were right. It was the exact same cabin, same seat layout, same lighting. But the footage looked old somehow, like low-quality surveillance video. The camera angle showed the rear section of the aircraft, and standing in the aisle was the same woman, motionless. One of the flight attendants unplugged a nearby screen immediately, but it stayed on. The footage continued. In the video, passengers began standing up one by one, looking panicked. Then the screen suddenly filled with violent static. All monitors shut off instantly. At the exact same moment, the plane dropped violently. People screamed as the aircraft suddenly lost altitude for several terrifying seconds. Oxygen masks deployed overhead. Luggage crashed from compartments. The captain's voice came over the speakers, sounding strained. Brace! Brace! I genuinely thought we were crashing. The woman in the aisle was gone now, completely gone. Flight attendants were shouting instructions while trying to help passengers secure oxygen masks. The guy beside me looked like he was about to cry. She followed me, he whispered. What are you talking about? I saw her before. I stared at him. He explained that 6 months earlier, he'd been flying from Davao to Manila during another overnight flight. According to him, a woman matching the exact same description appeared standing near the rear lavatory during turbulence. Passengers complained about her behavior. Then the plane experienced severe electrical failures before making an emergency landing. At the time, he thought it was just stress or exhaustion, until tonight. The turbulence became violent again. The aircraft shook so hard, I heard people vomiting nearby. A baby screamed non-stop somewhere behind us. Then the cabin lights shut off again, this time longer. In the darkness, illuminated only by emergency lights and phone screens, I saw movement near the front of the cabin. The woman, walking slowly down the aisle toward us. Passengers nearest to her started crying and pulling their legs away from the aisle. She moved unnaturally slowly. Like every step was deliberate. One of the flight attendants shouted, "Ma'am, stop!" The woman kept walking. Then she suddenly stopped beside row 19. A man seated there looked frozen in fear. The woman slowly leaned down close to his face. Too close. The man started screaming. Not normal scared screaming. Pure terror. Then every light came back on at once. The woman vanished. The man in row 19 was hyperventilating uncontrollably. Flight attendants rushed toward him while he kept repeating the same sentence over and over. She's dead. Nobody could calm him down. For the rest of the flight, nobody slept. Nobody even talked much. The captain announced we were making an emergency landing in Tacloban due to technical issues. When we landed, police, airport security, and medical staff boarded immediately. Passengers started describing what they saw all at once. The man from row 19 refused to speak to anyone. He just sat there shaking. Eventually, we were escorted off the plane around 4 a.m. I noticed the guy beside me disappearing quickly into the terminal crowd before authorities could question him further. I never saw him again. A week later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched online for accidents involving Philippine domestic flights. That's when I found something disturbing. In 1998, a flight traveling from Manila to Cebu experienced severe turbulence during a storm. According to old news articles, a female passenger suffering from mental distress repeatedly tried opening an emergency exit mid-flight. Passengers restrained her, but during the struggle, she suffered a fatal head injury near one of the cabin windows. Same airline, same aircraft model, and according to archived seat records, she had been seated in row 22, my row. I still remember one final detail that keeps bothering me. When we landed in Tacloban, I checked the window beside my seat while exiting the plane. There were 3 fresh cracks in the glass, perfectly spaced, like someone had smashed their forehead against it repeatedly. I live in Manchester, and for most of my life, I actually enjoyed flying. Not because I liked airports or turbulence or any of that. I just liked the feeling of leaving everything behind for a few hours. No phone calls, no work emails, just silence. After what happened in February of 2023, that feeling disappeared completely. Now I can barely step onto a plane without feeling sick. This happened on a flight from Prague to London Gatwick. I'd gone to Prague with 2 friends for a long weekend. Nothing wild. Mostly pubs, sightseeing, and trying to recover from months of non-stop work. The return flight was supposed to leave around 7 p.m., but snowstorms across parts of Europe delayed nearly everything. By the time we boarded, it was after midnight. The airport already felt strange by then. Half the shops were closed, employees looked exhausted, and passengers were sleeping across rows of seats near the gates. Everyone had that irritated zombie look people get during delayed overnight flights. My friends Ryan and Lewis were seated several rows behind me because the airline split us up after rebooking. I ended up in seat 18C beside the aisle. The man in the middle seat next to me looked to be around 60, thin, pale, wearing a brown overcoat despite the warm cabin temperature. He smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and old paper. The window seat beside him was empty, at least during boarding. I remember the old man watching every passenger who walked down the aisle with this uncomfortable intensity, like he was searching for someone. Eventually, boarding finished and the cabin doors closed. Then, right before pushback, a woman boarded alone. That caught my attention because everyone else was already seated. One of the flight attendants escorted her down the aisle quickly, without speaking much. The woman stopped beside our row and sat in the empty window seat. The second she sat down, the old man beside me tensed visibly. I noticed because he immediately gripped the armrest tightly enough for his knuckles to whiten. The woman herself looked normal enough at first glance. Maybe early 30s, dark coat, blonde hair tied back neatly. But there was something unsettling about her expression. She wasn't tired, wasn't annoyed, wasn't looking at her phone like everyone else. She was just staring straight ahead without blinking much. As the plane began taxiing, the old man leaned slightly toward me and whispered something that instantly made me uncomfortable. She wasn't at the gate. I frowned. "What?" "That woman," he whispered again. "She wasn't there before boarding closed." I shrugged awkwardly. Maybe she was delayed. The old man slowly shook his head. "No." That was the end of the conversation for a while. We took off through light snowfall, and the climb was rough enough to make several passengers nervous. Once we leveled out, the cabin lights dimmed and things settled. Most people tried sleeping. About 40 minutes into the flight, I noticed the woman beside the window standing up. Without saying a word, she walked calmly toward the rear of the plane. The old man watched her go the entire time. "You know her?" I asked quietly. "No," he said immediately, but he sounded unsure. 10 minutes passed, then 20. She never returned. Eventually, the old man pressed the attendant call button. A flight attendant approached looking tired. "Yes, sir?" "The woman sitting here hasn't come back." The attendant looked confused. "What woman?" The old man pointed at the empty window seat. "The woman who boarded late." The attendant stared at him for a second, then glanced at me. I said, "Yeah, she was sitting there." The attendant frowned. "I'll check." She walked toward the back of the cabin. When she returned several minutes later, her expression had changed slightly. "She's not in the lavatories," she said. The old man immediately looked alarmed. "What do you mean?" "We're probably just having a misunderstanding about seating assignments." But she didn't sound convinced. She quickly walked away again. The old man sat rigidly still after that. I tried convincing myself it was nothing. Maybe the woman moved to another empty seat. But then I noticed something strange. Her tray table was still down, and resting on it was a boarding pass. I picked it up instinctively. The old man grabbed my wrist immediately. "Don't touch that." Too late. I'd already seen the name. Emily Carter. The departure airport listed wasn't Prague. It was London Gatwick. I frowned in confusion. That doesn't make sense. The old man looked genuinely frightened now. Before either of us could say more, the plane lights flickered once. Then again. A few passengers groaned irritably. The captain came over the intercom apologizing for minor electrical interference. That should have been reassuring, but something about his voice sounded strained. A few moments later, one of the flight attendants hurried past us toward the cockpit, carrying the boarding pass I'd found. She looked pale. Then came the sound. A loud metallic bang from somewhere underneath the cabin floor. Passengers looked around nervously. The plane jolted slightly. Then the seatbelt sign turned on. The captain's voice returned, tighter this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting some unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated." Outside the windows, all I could see was darkness and snow clouds. The turbulence started almost immediately. Not violent at first, just constant shaking, enough to keep everyone awake. That's when the old man suddenly asked me something bizarre. "Did you notice her hands?" "What?" "The woman." I shook my head. They were bleeding. I felt a cold sensation crawl up my spine. Before I could respond, a scream erupted from the rear cabin. Not startled screaming, real panic. Several passengers sat upright instantly. A flight attendant shouted something I couldn't make out. Then another scream followed. People started turning around trying to see, and that's when I saw her. The woman, standing near the back row, motionless. Her head tilted slightly downward. One of the attendants approached cautiously. "Ma'am, you need to sit down." No response. The attendant stopped a few feet away. Even from halfway across the cabin, I could see dark stains covering the woman's sleeves now. Blood. The plane suddenly lurched violently sideways. Passengers screamed. Drinks and phones slid off tray tables. When the aircraft steadied again, the woman was gone. Completely gone. The attendant near the back looked horrified. She backed away slowly, staring at the empty aisle like she genuinely couldn't understand what she'd just seen. People started talking loudly now. The calm atmosphere completely disappeared. A man across from me asked, "Where did she go?" Nobody answered. The old man beside me looked close to panic. Then he finally told me the truth, or at least what he believed. 2 years earlier, he'd been on another flight from Prague to London during winter storms. According to him, a woman named Emily Carter had died on board after suffering severe injuries during unexpected turbulence. He claimed she'd been thrown against part of the cabin interior when the aircraft suddenly dropped altitude. She bled to death before they landed, he whispered. I stared at him. "You're joking." I testified afterward. I wanted to dismiss him as insane, but then the overhead screens turned on simultaneously. No welcome messages, no flight maps, just static. Passengers groaned in confusion. Then an image appeared briefly across every monitor. A photograph. A blonde woman smiling beside an airport window. The exact same woman from our row. Several passengers noticed immediately. One of them actually shouted, "That's her!" The image vanished into static again. Then, every screen went black. At the exact same moment, the cabin temperature dropped sharply. You could actually feel it. People started rubbing their arms and looking around confused. A child near the front began crying. And then came the knocking. 3 slow knocks, directly against the window beside the empty seat. Everyone in our row froze. The old man stared at the glass in horror. Another 3 knocks, from outside the plane, at 30,000 feet. I couldn't breathe properly, my entire body locked up. The old man whispered, "Don't look outside." Of course I looked. I wish I hadn't. Pressed against the window was the woman's face. Her eyes wide open, unnaturally wide, blood running from her forehead. And she was smiling. I recoiled so hard I nearly fell into the aisle. Several nearby passengers saw it too, because people started screaming immediately. The woman vanished from the window instantly afterward. Chaos erupted. Flight attendants rushed forward trying to calm people, but they looked terrified themselves now. The captain suddenly came over the intercom, sound panicked. "We are declaring an emergency landing." The plane began descending rapidly. The turbulence grew worse the lower we got. Passengers were crying openly now, praying. One man near the front was vomiting into an air sickness bag while shaking uncontrollably. Then the cabin lights shut off completely. Darkness swallowed everything except emergency aisle lighting. And in that darkness, I heard footsteps, slow footsteps moving up the aisle. People nearby started whimpering. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" The footsteps stopped beside our row. I could hear breathing beside me, wet breathing. Then a female voice whispered directly near my ear, "You should have helped me." The lights came back instantly. Nobody stood there. But the window seat beside us was no longer empty. There was water pooled across the cushion, dark red water. The old man started praying under his breath repeatedly. The plane finally landed at Gatwick after what felt like hours. Emergency crews surrounded the aircraft immediately. Passengers practically shoved each other trying to get off. When I reached the terminal, I realized my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my passport. Police interviewed multiple passengers because so many people reported seeing the same woman. The airline blamed mass panic caused by turbulence. That would almost make sense. Except for one thing. A week later, I searched the woman's name online. Emily Carter was real. She died aboard a Prague to London flight in February 2021 during severe turbulence. And according to the accident report, her assigned seat had been 18A, the seat beside me, the same seat that remained freezing cold for the entire flight home.